Section 3. Wherein the state of the question concerning secession from the present judicatories is declared. The author of the essay diverts himself a little with his criticisms upon the term secession, page 193, when he tells us the ordinary and common sense thereof is, quote, a local removing upon some urgent lawful occasion, spiritual or temporal, to another or better constituted church, unquote. Though the worthy divine whom he cites tells us that the word secession may be taken in this sense, yet he cannot but know that our divines have made use of this term to express a departure from communion with a particular visible church, either in whole or in part, upon just and weighty grounds, even when there is no local removing or changing of one's habitation. Hence Turretin, in his dissertation concerning the necessity of separation from the Church of Rome, makes still use of the term secession, though he knew very well that the Protestants in France and Germany and other popish countries never removed from their habitation except when force and violence drove them from them. Our author adds, quote, they, the seceding ministers, have not separated locally, seeing they still inhabit the same manses, as well as enjoy the same benefices, unquote. It seems the above observe upon the term secession is made, that he may vent somewhat of a grudge that we have a peaceable residence in our several congregations to which we bear a pastoral relation, and that we enjoy the benefices to which we have a just claim by venture of our office in relation to them. Next, he tells us, the word secession is sometimes taken for a revolt and mutiny. He does not allege any authority for this sense and meaning of the word, and I do not know if he can. But he is pleased to add, quote, many think that they have made a secession in that respect, unquote. Here he discovers a disposition to hold and treat us as revolters and mutineers. But I shall not trouble the reader further with his idle criticisms for handling such an important subject. Only I cannot but here observe that it may be reasonably presumed that our author has learned the above criticism from some doctor of the Church of Rome, or at least from some author whose name for shame he behooved to conceal, and what makes this conjecture more probable is that Mr. Cloud reports that doctors of the Church of Rome treated our worthy reformers after the same manner. His words are, they accuse them, that is, our reformers, to have been rebels and schismatics, who lifted themselves up against the authority of their mother in the church, and who broke the sacred bond of Christian communion, unquote. Which is the same upon the manner with which our author has advanced as above. But, whatever be in this, sure it was some urgent necessity that brought him upon the field, without a visible second, if not two to support him, seeing he seldom takes the field without 2 or 3 such attendants, though frequently pressed into his service. But I proceed to lay down some necessary observances and distinctions for laying open the true state of the question. First, there is a difference betwixt different sentiments amongst the members of a church upon some particular points that have never been a part or branch of testimony in that church, or that were never adopted in any of her public acts and constitutions, and such principles and practices maintained and justified, which are in themselves a departure or backsliding from some part or branch of what has been received and adopted as a point of confession and testimony in a church. The seceding brethren are far from stating their secession upon every difference of sentiments. He tells us upon his first proposition, quote, that some would and do excommunicate all that are not exactly of their mind, unquote. Who these some are, our author best knows. The instance that he gives of the giant Procrustes, page 6, has more levity in it than becomes the gravity of the subject. But as the above is none of the principles of the seceding ministers, for they know very well that the best of men have different sentiments, so the question before us is concerning such principles or practices as may be justly reckoned a departure from what has been matter of confession and testimony in this particular national church. Secondly, there is a vast difference betwixt evils and errors that a church may fall into, and these evils justified and continued in after the ordinary means have been used to reclaim a church or the judicatories thereof. The seceding ministers have not stated their secession upon any particular evils lately sprung up in this national church, and which the judicatories show a willingness to reform or bear testimony against in their judicial capacity, but upon such evils as have been often complained of and remonstrated against, Yea, and after all the ordinary means have been used to bring the judicatories to the faithful discharge of their duty, till at length some ministers were thrust out from the present judicatories merely on account of their contending in a way of communion against the foresaid evils, as is more fully shown in the introduction. Thirdly, it is one thing to depart from the communion of a church, and another thing to depart from the communion with a party in that church, though the greatest number, who are carrying on a course of defection and backsliding. The seceding brethren have always refused, and they do upon good grounds refuse, that they have made any secession from the Church of Scotland. If the Church of Scotland is considered as her principles are held forth from the Word of God in her Confession of Faith, larger and shorter catechisms, form of church government, directory for worship, and other laudable acts and constitutions of this national church, the seceding ministers have openly declared and acknowledged their adherence to all these in their Judicial Act and Testimony. Or, if her principles are considered as they are solemnly avouched and sworn to the National Covenant of Scotland and the Solemn League and Covenant of the Three Nations, they have also in like manner, in their foresaid Act and Testimony, acknowledged the inviolable Act and these solemn oaths and covenants. But if the Church of Scotland is considered as represented in her present judicatories, they own that they have declared a secession from them, and that they cannot now act in conjunction with them as members of the same ecclesiastical body, and that because they are carrying on a course of defection and backsliding from our covenanted uniformity in doctrine, worship, government, and discipline, notwithstanding of manifold representations and remonstrances made before them unto the contrary. Therefore, the question under our consideration is not concerning secession from the Church of Scotland, but concerning secession from the present judicatories of this national church. Fourthly, there is a vast difference betwixt a church pursuing after Reformation and a church declining and backsliding from her Reformation purity. In the former case, when a church is using her endeavors to reform what is wrong and to redress what is gravaminous, though through mistake she may take some wrong steps in her administration, yet it would be very unreasonable to depart from her communion. But in the latter case, when the prevailing course and management of the judicatories of a church is towards backsliding from Reformation purity once attained unto, every wrong step that is taken has a native tendency towards strengthening and accelerating the general course of apostasy and backsliding. Though the essay looks upon this distinction as of no weight, yet I find Mr. Shields in his treatise on church communion lays very much stress upon it. Therefore, pages 23 and 24 of that book, he lays down the very same distinction, and when he comes to state the question on page 27, he states it in the following manner according to his views of the Church of Scotland at that time. Quote, "The question," says he, "is not whether we can hold union or communion with those ministers, though sound in principles, who yet are carrying on courses and compliances with defections, involving in all sin that have communion with them, in a broken and declining state of the church. But the question is, whether we can have communion and union with these that did indeed comply with the wicked establishments of the time, and were involved in the defections of the church, but are now carrying on Reformation in worship, in doctrine, worship, discipline, and government, according to the institutions of Christ and the constitutions of this church in former times." Quote, "The same excellent person is yet more plain when he tells us on page 15, only we plead for union with Presbyterian ministers, promoting Reformation in doctrine, worship, discipline, and government, and opposing popery, prelacy, Erastianism, sectarianism, and whatsoever is contrary to sound doctrine and the power of godliness, according to the Word of God, our confession of faith, and covenants." Unquote. I humbly judge the seceding ministers may be satisfied to have their cause examined and tried according to the above way and manner in which Mr. Shields states the question. Our author thinks fit to tell us on page 196, quote, "that he knows the above treatise was recommended by our dear brother, the Reverend Mr. Ebenezer Erskine, to some of his parishioners, when at Portmouth. And, says he, I, with all our separatists, and others also, may read it seriously, hearkening to his solid reasons against separation." Unquote. Whether our author speaks of the Reverend Mr. Erskine in the above manner in a way of jest, or out of true regard unto him, I shall leave it to the reader to judge. Only I must observe that he has a good reason to recommend Mr. Shields on church communion, and I, with our author and others, would seriously consider his solid reasons and conclusions against union in conjunction with such as are carrying on a course of defection for our reformed and covenanted principles.